Welcome to the Flash Finds Podcast, the world's fastest podcast where we explore how Facebook can help you with the stuff you're into. I'm Emma Rogue, joined by Nathan the Cat Lady, a Facebook creator. So Nathan, if you're into pets, what kind of stuff can you find on Facebook?
Well, I make reels about useful tips for pet owners. For instance, cats don't like still water, so all of my cats have cat fountains.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute. What a great episode. See you next time on the Flash Finds Podcast, all about discovering the stuff on Facebook you care about. Bye.
Sergeant and Mrs. Smith, you're going to love this house.
Is that a tub in the kitchen?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
Hi there, Duke fans. DBR Podcast, episode 628. I am Jason Evans here for your listening pleasure. I am joined by my good friend Donald Wine. Donald, how you doing today? It is shortly after 3 o'clock on is it a Wednesday? Yeah, on a Wednesday afternoon.
It's very busy today, but it's good that we get to take a break and talk about what we're going to talk about today. And we're not alone, Jason. We have a guest with us. Special guest joining us. Now, by the way, I want to point out before we introduce our special guest, we thought that our special guest was going to be Sion James. Sion James, the brand new commit to the Duke basketball team. I spoke to him. We were all set to record an interview with him, his first interview since becoming a member of the Duke program, since joining the Brotherhood. And we were like literally 24 hours away from doing this interview. And Sion said to me, he sent me a text and he goes, "Hey, I just spoke to the program and they said they really want my first interview to be on the Brotherhood podcast. So we have to wait a little bit. He's got to get to campus. He's graduating from Tulane in the next couple days. I, by the way, will be at the Tulane graduation because my son is graduating from law school there. So, and by the way, I might get a chance to connect with Sion. We've been talking about maybe grabbing a cup of coffee or something like that. Beginning to introduce him to the crazy maniacal world of Duke fandom. But in any event, he tells me we will get an interview with him, but it'll probably be after they do the podcast interview, the Brotherhood podcast interview. So instead of Sion James, we're joined by Scott Rich. Scott, I apologize, man.
I think we have to clarify. I'm not sure I'm a very special guest. I think I'm a very average, normal guest, especially relative to what you set up there.
Look, I will say very quickly, Jason, that as an aside, Scott and I were texting the other day, and we found out we knew we were from Michigan, and we like to talk about that when we're on the show. But I learned that he not only is from Michigan, but went to my rival high school, which he doesn't like, but at least we had to banter on that a little bit via text. But yeah, the world just keep getting smaller and smaller. Day. Yeah.
It's a real thing back in Metro Detroit. And if you don't know Cranbrook, you do know Cranbrook. If you've ever watched the movie 8 Mile, go Google it.
Yes.
And then chuckle at my high school's expense.
All right. So now that we know the players on this episode, let's introduce the concept. And this is all my idea, and maybe it's a good one, maybe it's a bad one. I haven't figured it out yet. I'll let you know in 30 minutes or so when we're done talking. The idea was this. The Duke roster is largely set, we believe. We don't think that there's anyone else going to be joining the program who is expected to be a meaningful minutes kind of player. We may get practice players who join and things like that. But in terms of the guys who are going to be in the rotation, we think the roster is set at this point. So I wanted to do this. I want to look at the various players. We're not going to be specifically talking minutes. This is not a minutes contest kind of thing, but the three of us are going to talk through each of the different players, and we're going to talk through what we think, what our expectations are for that player, what his role will be, what kind of, what we're expecting to see from him in terms of performance, where they fall in the rotation, that kind of stuff. And because it's such a large roster, because there are really 11 guys that we're dealing with here, this episode's going to be the perimeter players. And then we're going to do another episode that will be the big men. And there's a twist. This is part one, so to speak, of this experiment. Once we get a little bit of intel, once the players have arrived on campus, once we start hearing a bit about how practices are going and that kind of thing, late summer-ish, maybe July, probably August, the three of us will come back and we will revisit this. We'll remember what we said and see if we are accurate. And we will give another set of predictions, and then we'll probably do it one last time right before the season starts. Donald, is this a good idea or bad? You tell me.
It's a terrible idea, which is exactly what we do here in this podcast. We like to take terrible ideas and turn them into episodes that people can listen to. But I will say this, for the purposes of this episode, I know we're going to be talking about one segment of the team. As you mentioned, Jason, Sion James has not yet graduated from his other school yet, and showed up on campus. When we get to the bigs, Common Malawach will not show up on campus for a few months because he'll be busy, playing, getting ready for the Olympics and then playing in the Olympics. So what we are doing here, ladies and gentlemen, to simplify it, is guessing. We are guessing on how all this is going to turn out, and we reserve the right to be right, and we reserve the right to be like, nah, it was just a guess. So if we're super, super accurately right, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear when we are correct. When we are absolutely dead wrong, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Save those for like later on in the summer when we have a full-fledged notion of what we can expect from this team.
Look, my
idea.
idea.
You guys invite me on to set me up for failure. This is beautiful. It's twice now. You're not Sion James, and we're going to do something real hard. Scott, welcome in.
I love it, Scott. You're always game for whatever craziness it is that we want to talk about. I will say this. I feel like everyone out there that I talk to about Duke basketball is wondering and talking about the rotations, about where do guys fit. And I just feel like, look, folks, feel free when we're talking about these players to pause the podcast and toss in your own comment, because I tell you, every Duke fan out there is wondering and talking about, where does this guy fit? Where does this happen? I mean, this is the big question right now. Now that we know the roster, the question is how they all go together. So let's start with this. I'm going to make it easy on you guys. Again, we're doing the perimeter players. Here's the rundown of players: Tyrese Proctor, Caleb Foster, then the three freshmen, Isaiah Evans, Con Knuppel, Darren Harris, and then two of the transfers, Sion James and Mason Gillis. Those are the guys we're going to be discussing as we go through today. All the other players we're saving as big men. And yes, Donald and I had a discussion. Do we put Mason Gillis with the big men or with the perimeter players? I think he's a little bit more of a perimeter player, but I guess you could maybe flip-flop him either way. That'll be part of our discussion, right?
Part of our discussion is what I was going to say.
There we go. Exactly. All right. So like I said, we'll start easy. How about we start with Tyrese Proctor? Tyrese Proctor, a rising junior, been in the program for 2 years. I feel very comfortable in saying we know Tyrese Proctor better than anybody. I think we are more sure of his role than anyone else out there. So Scott, seeing as I gave you the hard job of replacing Sion James on this episode, why don't you get the conversation? What's your expectation for what we should expect from Tyrese Proctor?
I think Tyrese is such an interesting situation because if the season ends slightly differently, Duke fans' expectations for Tyrese Proctor change dramatically for this season. The fact that Tyrese Proctor ended with arguably one of his worst offensive games in a Duke uniform against NC State. Not arguably, it was. He scored 0 points. I feel like that soured some of the discussion about what this Duke backcourt looks like next year, which I think is a huge disservice to the player that Tyrese Proctor is. Again, last year, you look at the stats, 30 minutes a game, 10.5 points, 3.7 assists, 1.3 turnovers per game. That is an all ACC caliber point guard's level of stats. Then you take into account the fact that, yeah, it was a sophomore year, but he reclassed up a year. He is a junior at a sophomore age. If that was his freshman year, that if I just quoted off his freshman year lines instead of his sophomore year lines, I think the general buzz around Tyrese Proctor is absolutely ecstatic about the leap forward he is going to take. And yes, the reality is he didn't become the lottery pick, all ACC caliber guy that we expected going from his freshman to sophomore year. But that ceiling is still there. Tyrese Proctor is still the player who many thought before last year could play himself into being a lottery pick. He's still the player who has prototypical NBA size for a point guard. He's still the player who has the three-point shot, even if it has been a little bit inconsistent. He's still the player who could be one of the best defensive guards in the ACC. That's a guy who you can build a team around. And again, it's the atmosphere around him has just been soured that little bit by that dud in, unfortunately, the most important game of the year in the Elite Eight.
Donald, let me toss to you with this question. When Tyrese Proctor is in the game, I think we all expect, let's not get into, is he going to play a large role? Is he going to start? That's a question we can ask about some of these other guys. There's no question Tyrese Proctor is starting, almost certainly playing 30 plus minutes per game. My question is this: is Tyrese Proctor Duke's point guard? Is he the guy initiating the offense virtually every moment that he is in the game this upcoming season?
No. And I'll get to that in just a second. I will say that it's funny, Scott, you mentioned about how people might think differently of how Tyrese Proctor's season ended because of how he played in the Elite Eight. If he plays differently, if this team plays differently, he may not be here, right? We may not have a conversation to have because we win a national championship or at least get to the Final Four. He hasn't, that stage to kind of propel himself because, again, he was considering, between the NBA draft and coming back, he ultimately chose to come back, but maybe that role changes, if we hang another banner in Cameron Indoor Stadium. But I digress. He is our quarterback now, so to speak. And so I think, Jason, when you think about him as the primary ball handler, primary doesn't mean 100% of the time. It means that most of the time, 50 plus 1, 50% plus 0.1, he will have the ball in his hands. And I think that is accurate. But I do think we have a lot of guys who we're going to talk about that can be the ball handler at times. And even this past year, we had so many guys. I mean, think about it. We had lineups that on the floor, we had guys who at every position could bring the ball up and initiate the offense because that's kind of how we were able to go. And I think this next year, we're going to have the same thing because keep in mind that there's going to be times where.
Wait, Donald, there. Cooper Flagg is far more capable of doing that than Mark Mitchell. Let me just put it that way.
But Mark Mitchell had the ball in his hands, right? That's the point. Is even when we say there was a point where we had lineup where every person could bring the ball up, and all of them did at times. Mark Mitchell brought it up at times. Even Kyle Filipowski brought it up at times, right? We had those lineups, and it doesn't necessarily mean that Tyrese Proctor is no longer the point guard. But it does mean that he's still the guy that we count on to initiate the offense. I think that is absolutely clear. But I do think when you talk about some of the other guards that we're going to discuss, and I'll leave those discussions for when we get to them, there are other guys on this team that can bring the ball up. Also, if we're talking about running in transition, you don't have to find Tyrese for that because you got guys who can bring the ball up and do it quickly, get a ball to a guy on the wing for a three, or get the ball down the floor for an easy layup or dunk. So I think when we look at Tyrese Proctor, he's going to be the main generator of offense, the main quarterback, the main captain, the vocal leader. He's going to have all those qualities that we've seen in him. But there's going to be times where he can defer to other guys and maybe focus on defense where he was elite, when he was healthy. He can focus on, shooting the three, which he was kind of hot and cold on last year, but we know that he had times where he could fill it up. So sometimes if he's on, someone else is probably going to take those responsibilities of being the primary ball handler to keep the hot hand rolling. If it's not him, then he focuses on distributing the ball to his teammates.
Yeah, the point you're making about being on, he is someone who took a tremendous number of 3-point shots, especially late in the year for Duke. It was not uncommon to see him putting up 6, 8, even 10 3-pointers in a game. And I think that you may see him playing that kind of role again next year. There's gonna be so much focus, I think, on Cooper Flagg. Teams are gonna be so worried about the offensive skills of Kaman Malawach, who is an elite offensive player. That you may see Tyrese Proctor getting those open looks. To me, the biggest thing is this. A year ago, we thought that he was going to make a big leap. Let's just be honest. It's not like he was bad, but we did not see from Tyrese Proctor the player that we thought we were going to get. When Duke was preseason number 1 or number 2, a lot of that was because everyone thought Tyrese Proctor was going to play his way into being a lottery pick. Instead, he played his way into being not draftable. Tyrese Proctor knows that there is a world where he improves his play this year, where he is more dangerous on offense, where he finishes a little bit better, and he is back in the conversation for a first-round draft pick. This is a money season for Tyrese Proctor. Now, I can't tell you how it's going to turn out. I'm not going to make that kind of speculation yet, but the opportunity is there, and he's going to get the minutes so that if the opportunity is there, he's going to have a chance to prove that to the NBA. This is not a guy who is a sure thing of being a future NBA player at this point. He just isn't. His offense, frankly, wasn't good enough. So I think one of the interesting things that come this season is, can he step it up? Can he be a little more dangerous, especially penetrating, getting into the lane, turning a corner on guys, and either finishing himself or setting up his teammates? We talked about his stats. The best version of Tyrese Proctor is a Tyrese Proctor that's getting 5+ assists a game. I don't think it's a leap at all to say that that's what we should expect from Tyrese Proctor this coming season if he's playing really well. Scott, last word on Tyrese.
You brought up an interesting question about, is he the point guard? And I feel like that's a question that almost is null and void in the modern game. Right? This isn't the game that we all grew up with. If you were the point guard, you got the ball out of bounds, you dribbled it up across half court. That was what the point guard did. And we just talked about how last year it didn't really matter who the point guard was on the floor. Oftentimes, whoever got the rebound made one outlet, and that guy pushed the ball up the floor. Right? And I think that is the type of team that we are shaping up to have this year, especially with Cooper Flagg and his versatility, especially with Mason Gillis and the things that he can do as a veteran leader out there who knows how to play the game. I don't think it'll matter quite as much about whether Tyrese Proctor is quote unquote the point guard or not. I think what's going to matter is he making the right decisions when he gets the ball in the half court, regardless of whether that's him initiating the offense or whether that's off of some action.
And one thing I think he's going to work on this offseason, like you said, Scott, there's going to be times where we get the outlet, we go up, and maybe something doesn't happen immediately, right? You try to go up, you maybe try to get a good shot, but if you don't have one, you pull the ball back and you reset the offense. That's where Tyrese Proctor steps up. But also when he's moving the ball around, I bet you this summer he works on a lot of catch and shoot situations from the top of the key or from the wing, because I think when they, when teams key in on Cooper Flagg, or they, key in on maybe even Caleb Foster or Kaman Malawach, and the ball goes in, he's going to be a guy that could end up being, for no fault of his own, the 5th option on the court, because there's 4 other guys on the court that are in a better position to score. So when he's out the top of the key trying to reset the offense, he may have that opportunity to take those pop and swaps from the top of the key when he's wide open. And as we mentioned last year, there were games where if he was wide open, he was knocking it down, and you could feel in your soul that it was going in. He's going to work on that this summer, because I think he's going to get a lot of those opportunities next season.
All right, let's move on to the next guy, who is Caleb Foster. With Caleb Foster, I think the story is, does he make the sophomore leap? We think that's a thing. We thought that was the thing that was going to vault last year's team. It didn't really happen. So the question has to be, is Caleb Foster going to be a guy who takes a big sophomore leap? Donald, I'll come to you first on CF.
You know, Caleb Foster is an interesting dynamic to this team. And you know, when we talked about the Brotherhood episode where they kind of introduced Caleb Foster and Tyrese Proctor as the backcourt for the season, I think Caleb Foster is going to have times where he may not play as many minutes just because of the fact that we have some guys that we can work in different situations. And I think the situations that Caleb Foster, again, can be very good at, I think, honestly, the funny thing is he can probably improve his ball handling because there's going to be opportunities for him to be the ball handler, even with Tyrese Proctor on the court. But I think his three-point shooting, you know, he was 40% last year. He was one of the team leaders in that category. And he had some moments where he was able to hit some big threes. He also can provide some assists, and I think that is going to try and uptick this season. I think the one thing, Jason, where he can be, I want to see him make a leap is on defense. And I'm not saying he wasn't a great defender last year because I thought he was pretty good, especially for a freshman. But I think having a sophomoric leap in defense will really help this team because it'll take a lot of the pressure off of the freshmen who may be in the game at the time, whoever it is, whether it's Cooper Flagg or even, you know, all the way down to Darren Harris or Patrick Ngongba. If he is an elite defender alongside a Tyrese Proctor, alongside a, you know, even a Mason Gillis or Sion James, who both can defend as well, it creates so much comfort on defense for the team as a whole, because if we're stopping guys before the ball even gets into the paint, then good luck to whoever actually gets it in the paint, then it's to, you know, play volleyball against Cooper Flagg and Kama Malawach. So I think when it comes to Caleb Foster, there's a lot of things that he can work on in the offseason, and it all depends on how his stress fracture is healing, which hopefully is right on cue for him to start resuming workouts in June with the rest of the team. But I do think if he elevates his game on defense, people are going to have a lot of problems with Caleb Foster, because it'll really, again, our defense is going to really shine through and really help our offense work. But him being one of the guys who can take the other, you know, primary ball handler and shut him down and then go on offense and smoke him, like, teams are going to have fits if Caleb Foster is the one beating him, which he has the opportunity to do on any given night.
All right, so Scott, I'm going to go next, and then I'm going to let you go. Get ready for a bit of a hot take. So last year, Caleb Foster averaged about 25.5 minutes per game. I'm going to tell you right now that that is either going to go up or down by 5 minutes per game. Either Caleb Foster is going to take that sophomore leap and be a lot better, a lot more assertive, a lot bigger part of Duke's game plan than he was last year, in which case I think he will play more like 30 minutes per game. Or if he doesn't, there is a lot of competition. There are a lot of guys who are waiting, eager to get perimeter minutes. We talked about the fact that there are a lot of guys that we got to cover on this podcast. And I think Caleb Foster, I'm not saying he's going to lose his starting spot necessarily, but I think Caleb Foster could find himself, you know, pushed down a little bit in terms of minutes, in terms of role in the rotation, if he doesn't step up because of this. Last year, he just had a 16% usage rate. It's one of the lowest on the entire team. Like, Ryan Young was below that. Jalen Blakes was below that. But I mean, in terms of like regular players, a 16% of usage rate for a guy who played as much as he does, for a guy who has the ball in his hands as much as it was, not very impressive. He only had the fourth best assist rate on the team. He was playing point guard most of the time, and he had the fourth best assist rate on the team. Kyle Filipowski was a more reliable assist man than he was. Jeremy Roach, who frankly has not been a guy who's been a big assist guy throughout his career, was a more reliable assist guy than Caleb Foster. Caleb Foster only hit 45.9% of his 2-point field goals last year. 46% of his 2-point field goals. That's like easily the worst of any regular who played a significant amount on this team. He clearly struggled to finish in the lane against ACC opponents in ACC games. Get ready for the number, guys. He just hit 37.5% of his 2-point field goals. Ouch. That's awful. It's the guy who only had 8 games, even though he played good minutes, he only had 8 games where he finished in double figures. I talked about the sophomore leap. If Caleb Foster does not make a leap, if Caleb Foster is not scoring in double figures more regularly, if Caleb Foster is not more efficient and scoring his 2-point shots, finishing in the lane better than he did as a freshman, Caleb Foster is not getting the same kind of minutes because there are too many guys waiting to take it from him. Scott.
So you said you think it's going to go up by 5 minutes or down by 5 minutes. I'll take that bet. I'll take the over. I think Caleb Foster is going to claim that 30-plus minute per game role. And I know we're not doing minutes. I'm already breaking the rules of the podcast. That's what happens when you invite me on. Here's the thing.
Shame.
The minutes are sort of a substitution for like rotation role kind of thing. That's fine.
So here's the thing. One, Caleb Foster only had 4 games last year where he played less than 20 minutes. That was when he was primarily the 6th man on this team. So he was good enough and trusted enough by John last year that he was earning easily 20 minutes a game. He was playing a majority of the game almost every time he suited up.
And I think one of those was when he got hurt, right? Like in the middle of the game.
Actually not. He played 22 minutes in that weight game where he got hurt. Believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah. Bringing back some bad memories there. But
yeah,
the other thing that I'm optimistic about with Caleb is he brings the 3-point shooting that we all talk about that this team is going to need. I think, a lot of this offseason has been about how do we complement Cooper Flagg? How do we space the floor around him? How do we get him the 3-point shooting to give him the space to operate? We forget that Caleb Foster was a 40% 3-point shooter on not bad volume last year. Yes, they were mostly, secondary threes that were open. He wasn't tasked with creating them himself necessarily. But if he's someone that's going to shoot more than 40% from 3, and he's someone that we already know has John Shire's trust to play 20-plus minutes a game, it's going to be hard to keep him off the floor. Arguably, it might be harder to keep him off the floor than it is Tyrese Proctor if Caleb is making his threes consistently and Tyrese isn't. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen, but we talk about shooting. One of the biggest concerns from Duke fans seems to be, where is the shooting going to come from? How consistent is it going to be? Again, recency bias kills us. We didn't see Caleb Foster for the last month of the year, but he was a 40% free 3-point shooter as a freshman. There is every reason to believe that he can maintain that next year. And if he can, it's going to be hard to keep him off the floor, especially because we know John Shire likes to play his starters' minutes. We've seen that through 2 years. We've talked every year about how we're going to be so deep, how we're going to go 9-10 men deep. It hasn't happened.
It never happens.
The one thing I told myself before, when you broached this idea to me was, I'm not going to die on that hill. I'm not saying we're going 9-10 deep, because that is how I make myself look real stupid real fast as the very special guest. So I think it is much more likely that Tyrese and Caleb both average 30 minutes a game this year than it is that one of them drops down.
I think the other thing too, and Jason, you mentioned it, is the competition for all these spots, right? There is no room necessarily for error, and there's no room for lazy play. There's no room for guys who aren't going to make that leap, and everyone is counted on to make a leap. It's not just Caleb Foster. It's not just Tyrese Proctor. All these guys coming in are going to be asked to elevate their game to a level that they have not yet taken it to, because that's what's going to be expected of Duke basketball next year as a whole. And so that pressure will hopefully create diamonds. But at the same time, I think for Caleb Foster, I think a lot of people kind of, Scott Rich, you were saying, hey, he's going to probably, start and get starters minutes. There's some people who probably think that, hey, if he doesn't shine in the first couple games, enter a Sion James or enter a Mason Gillis, or maybe it's a 2-guard by committee based on the opponent, right? Bigger opponents, just like in baseball, you kind of have your starting pitchers that they have the gas, and then you got your old LD craftsman who can, do the palm ball, right? Who do you call in different situations? But I think that's what this summer is going to be about, was figuring out where all these guys fit. And, there could be a lineup that doesn't have Tyrese Proctor or Caleb Foster on the floor. There could be a lineup that has one of them there could be a lineup that has both of them and somebody else. And I think the great thing about Caleb Foster is I think he matches up well with a lot of other guys that are on this roster, and they and he complements the other guys well with what he does well. The only question I have is, can he remain healthy enough and recover from that injury to make a force and really improve his game over the summer?
All right,
I
gentlemen.
want to see that as one of the stats games questions. I want to see one of the stat game questions be, how many minutes per game are Tyrese and Caleb both on the bench?
Ooh, like together?
Yes.
Yeah.
For how many significant minutes per game are neither Tyrese nor Caleb in the game?
That's a great question.
I would go quite low on. I would go quite low on that.
I think that's a really low number.
That's a
Donald,
great question.
But it sounds like Donald number saying it might not be as low as we think. So,
I'm not going to track that, and I don't know if Sam's going to. That's really the question here.
Okay, guys, we got to move on because we're taking way too long. Those were the two guys we knew really well, and we spent forever on them. Let's get to the transfers, the guys I guess we know the next best, Sion James and Mason Gillis. Let's start with Mason Gillis. And Scott, I will let you go first. Tell me what you think about him. And guys, I'm going to spoil this for you. When you guys are done talking about Mason Gillis, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to segue from one to the other. You're going to see what I'm going to do in just a moment. But Scott, get us started. What do you think of the role of Mason Gillis on this team?
I'm so damn excited to have Mason Gillis in a Duke uniform. When he was in the portal, for those people who listen to the podcast and are on the forums, I went on the forums and I said, Mason Gillis is perfect. Let's go get him. I didn't think that was even within a realm of possibility because he seemed like the type of guy who'd want to go somewhere to star, take a step down for his super senior year. He didn't. He's coming to Duke, and I think he is going to have a huge, huge impact on this team. But I do think it's going to be in a complementary role, because that is what he knows. That is what he was at Purdue. For 4 years at Purdue, on really, really good Purdue teams, he was the consummate sixth man. He was the guy who would come in and he would make every open three that he took. He, was one of the best 3-point shooters in the country last year. But he would come in and do the dirty things. He would come in and defend 2 through 4. He would come in and provide that physicality and that grit that I think a lot of Duke fans have been wanting to see, and we're going to get to see not only with Mason, but with Sion James as well. I don't think that a guy like Mason Gillis is necessarily, his impact is going to be seen in how many points does he score a game, how many minutes does he play a game. I think that he's the type of guy who he's probably going to be this team's sixth man. Because I think, again, him coming off the bench allows Cooper Flagg to play his more natural 3, at least to start the game. But he's a guy who, he might play 5 minutes one game. He might play 25 minutes the next game, depending on the matchup, depending on how he's shooting, depending on how physical that game is. And again, I think it's very hard to pigeonhole him into a specific role. And I think that that's a good thing, not a bad thing. The fact that we can't pigeonhole him into a specific role doesn't mean he can't do anything specific. It means he is generalizable enough of a player to fill whatever hole is necessary on that day in that matchup, given who's playing and who's not in the Duke uniform that day.
When Mason Gillis committed, I have normally a large number of Purdue fans that are friends. All of them great people. And all of them hate Duke. I mean, they hate Duke. But when Mason Gillis committed to Duke, every last one of them said, I love this move for him, and I love this move for Duke. You guys are going to be amazing next year with this guy. Why? Because there's a couple of things that I'm looking for him when he enters. The couple of questions that I have. One, he's going to embrace this six-man role. He's the Big Ten six-man of the year, Scott. And he's a guy that, like you said, is just a consummate teammate. He can come off the bench. He can do what you need to do. Does he walk onto this team and become one of the captains? He was a 2-time captain at Purdue. And again, like you mentioned, amongst the sea of stars that have come through that program in the time that he's been there, he's been that constant North Star that has been guiding the team all the way, this year to the national title game. I look for him to come in and be one of those leaders and establish his role immediately, because he's a guy kind of like Ryan Young who embraces, I don't need to start. I don't need to get 30 minutes a game. I need to just, whatever you call on me to do, I'm going to do. If you want me to hit 46.8% from three like I did last year, sure, I can do that. If you want me to, be the enforcer, kind of be the checking unit, which he also was at Purdue. He, like, when I say a mean, I say this in all jest, he has a mean streak, right? It's not, when I say mean, he's not going to let you intimidate him or his teammates. And there are going to be guys who are going to go after Cooper Flagg. They're going to go after Tyrese Proctor. They're going to go after Kevin Mowich. They're going to go after Isaiah Evans to see if they got a little dog in him. Mason Gillis got a whole dog pound in him. So he's not going to shy away from those battles, and he's going to protect his teammates. So you want a guy who could be on the floor for those situations. But I also think the biggest part is Mason Gillis can play, like you mentioned, he can play the two, he can play the four. He can size down to guard smaller point guards. He can size up to guard a 6'10" power forward in the paint. And because of his versatility, I think he sees minutes in this offense. And especially on defense, where, again, if we want to go small, because there's very, and I say small because Tyrese Proctor is the shortest guy on the team.
There's no one team.
If a team tries to do that, right? Because we're going to play some teams that just can't, no one's going to match up with us for the most part in terms of height. So there's going to be teams who are, everyone's much smaller than us. So we have to kind of size down. Mason Gillis can give you that option to do that. And I think that's where his versatility is going to make it, where he walks onto this team. Will he shoot 46.8% from three? In limited numbers. Will he be able to, he's a career 40% 3-point shooter. So if he can maintain 40%, I'm good with that. But also, again, the leadership qualities and that dog, right? Can he bring the dog on a nightly basis? And can he make sure that when it comes to Duke, when people start getting physical, he answers right back and makes them understand that if you want to try it with him, he's not the one.
Donald, you mentioned the fact that, he can play big. I think he's going to play a non-trivial amount of minutes at the quote-unquote 4 this year for Duke. This is something Jason and I were debating earlier this week when he told me to come on the podcast. I think that, Mason Gillis did that while at Purdue. There were lineups where he was on the floor where it was a quasi 4-guard lineup, and he was the guy who was guarding the second biggest player on the opposition. Again, is that going to be Duke's best lineup with our versatility in the roster construction we have? Probably not. But we know there will be teams that play smaller. UNC this year could be playing very smaller, especially if they play Belmont transfer Cade Tyson as a small ball 4, which is what many people are speculating they might. In that type of matchup, heck yeah, Mason Gillis can guard Cade Tyson. I take that matchup in a heartbeat. Right? So I think that's something that we think of him as a small forward, we think of him as a wing, but he has that capability, and that's a little bit of versatility. That's an extra tool in Duke's toolbox that I think will come into play for a couple of games this year.
All right, let me give you my take on Mason Gillis, which is, as you guys said, elite shooting. Nearly 47% from three. We can't talk about that enough. And a versatile, outstanding defender who does all the little stuff. A week ago, I would have said to you, I am certain that he is going to be very high in the Duke rotation, and that there were certainly scenarios where he is a starter from day one. But then Duke brought in Sion James, sorry. And this is where, like I said, I'm sort of transitioning from one guy to the other. I'm transitioning our conversation. I am much less sure of Mason Gillis's role, at least in terms of the size of his role, since Duke brought in Sion James, because I think they are in many ways similar kind of players. They are both, neither one of their guys are going to put the ball on the floor and create for you. Neither one of them are guys who are high usage offensive players. They are guys who are release valves, spot up players. And in the case of Mason Gillis, he takes the spot up and he shoots the 3 and hits it. In the case of Sion James, he takes the spot up. He can hit the 3, but a lot of the time he takes that ball to the goal and finishes at the rim and is absolutely elite at finishing at the rim. I think that the superior athleticism because Sion James is a better athlete. He's a better run jump kind of guy than Mason Gillis. I think that he may be a little bit better defender, maybe a little tiny bit more versatility as a defender, a guy who's going to get a few more deflections and stuff like that, get in the way of what the other team is doing. I think that Sion James takes a little bigger role compared to Mason Gillis. Remember, in Sion James, we're talking about a guy who averaged 14 points a game last year. Mason Gillis averaged 6. We're talking about a guy in Sion James that hit 60% of his 2-point field goals. In Sion James, we're talking about a guy who was outstanding at drawing fouls. The only guy on Duke's team last year who drew fouls at a higher rate than Sion James was Mark Mitchell. Remember, Mark Mitchell would just live at the line some games. Sion James is that kind of player. And I just think that I think that Duke's probably not going to have a lot of time where both of those guys are on the floor together. Again, 2 low usage kind of guys, 2, 3 and D or spot up and D kind of players. I don't think they necessarily fit together a lot at Duke. So I think that Sion James is the one who's going to play a little bit more, and Mason Gillis play a little bit less. In fact, I'll go ahead and say this: at the start of the season, the very beginning of the year, I think that Sion James will be a starter for the Duke Blue Devils. That he'll be starting on the wing. That Cooper Flagg, we're not getting into the bigs, but it spills on down. Cooper Flagg will be starting ostensibly at the power forward, and that you will see Malik Brown starting as the center at the 5 for Duke, because I think it's going to take a little while for Conan Malawach to be ready to start. I'm not saying that's what Duke's lineup will be come December, come January, come ACC time, but at the very beginning of the year, I won't be at all surprised if there's a lineup something like that, and where Sion James, a guy who has done nothing but start his entire career, a guy who has played like 35, 37 plus minutes per game his entire career, I think he's going to play big minutes for Duke, and I think he is a starter on day one.
I think when it comes to, as we transition to Sion James, I think the question between Sion James and Mason Gillis is not about who starts, because as we mentioned, I think actually they both are 2 different players in that regard. Mason Gillis is a guy who doesn't start that often, whereas Sion James, as you mentioned, has started most of his career and puts up heavy minutes and puts up more points. I think is about where you can, again, you have that opportunity and you have that option. John Shire has the option of, hey, say for example, 2 of the bigs, 3 of the bigs get into foul trouble in a half. You can put a Mason Gillis at the 4, and you can put a Sion James at the 3, and you can still be okay, right? You can bring in a Conkanipple and have him at the 3 or 4. Those are options that you have in your back pocket. Doesn't mean you have to play those cards all the time, but those are options that you see. And I think when you transition to Sion James, I think what excites me the most about him is his ability to finish at the rim. Because last year, Jason, we talked about it all season. What was the thing that we were terrible at? It was finishing at the rim. We got blocked, 15 or 14% of the time, it felt like. Every one of every 5-6 times we went to the rim, we would get it sent or get blocked or get at least, and then because of that, I wouldn't say scared, but they had to think about, and they were trying to be a little too crafty in getting to the rim and trying to put it on the basket, and they would miss. So we missed a lot of bunnies. And I think with Sion James, he doesn't care about that. He's just going to go to the rim. He's going to go hard. He's great at finishing. His athleticism is going to keep him in the air while he makes a decision on what to do with the basketball. And I think, again, his finishing ability is what excites me the most. He doesn't have to shoot a ton of threes, but yes, if he's going to shoot decently, 38 to 40%, awesome. But he doesn't have to do that in this offense. But I think the way he complements a Caleb Foster and a Tyrese Proctor when all 3 of them could be on the floor is that he's the guy that can go to the rim and kind of close out, whereas these guys can also move into positions on the 3 where they can take threes. Cooper Flagg can even come out and hit a 3 if he wants to, right? Or also, Sion James could go to the rim and throw the ball up and decide which of, Malik Brown, Cooper Flagg, or Colin Malach, whoever's on the floor, wants to go get it and take the rim with him. Those are ideas that I see Sion James having. But I also think the one thing that Sion James has, that man is a consummate teammate. Just like Mason Gillis, he will do whatever you need him to do. He is a 2-time American Athletic Sportsmanship Award winner. I didn't know they had a Sportsmanship Award winner until we looked into Sion James last week. But he's won 2 in a row because he is a guy that no matter what his role is, he's not going to be on the end of year all ACC first team, second team, third team. But in terms of heart, in terms of like pride, in terms of teammate ability, those kind of leadership qualities of like taking guys under his wing, this man is going to be at or near the top of the ACC in that stat, because I think he is going to be a guy that helps his teammates come along.
So, hey, just really quick, Donald, you brought the stat about the block percentage. Just so we put the actual number out there, it is 12%. Duke was on offense, had 12% of their 2-point shots blocked. Block percentage doesn't count 3-pointers that are blocked because that's so rare. We were 342nd, one of the bottom 20 or so teams in all of college basketball at block percentage. And so much of that came at the rim. And yes, like you said, that is one of the reasons why I think Sion James is going to be so important to this team. He is not someone who gets stopped at the rim.
That's going to change.
Yeah. Scott, give me your comments on Sion James.
So I've got a comparison with Sion when I'm looking at him that some people are going to love and some people are going to hate. I see Sion James as a bigger, much, much better Jalen Blakes. And I see him as having that type of defensive impact on this team, the way Jalen did, but in a much bigger frame that obviously increases that ceiling. And Jalen also was a really, really strong athlete, again, in the 6'2" frame, which limited a little bit of his impact. And he was also a bit of a streaky shooter. There were moments in, especially his sophomore year where we saw, maybe he's turned a corner, and that obviously never happened. You guys talked on the emergency pod about how Sion James really upped his 3-point percentage this past year to 38%, but that was a bit of an outlier, and there's a question of, can he maintain that at Duke?
Yeah, that was my big concern. Yeah.
And I think that is, I agree with you that that's going to dictate whether he is a starter. Like you said, I don't think he's necessarily going to start at the beginning of the year, but whether he plays starters minutes or whether he is a 5-10 minute per game, come in defensive, minded, play at 100 miles an hour type of role. I think more than anyone else on this team, the variance in what Sion James's role is huge. And it could be a 5-minute per game Jalen Blakes type, and it could be a starter. And I think that's something that we probably won't know until, we reconvene in July and we've seen a little bit of what this team looks like over the summer. And we've seen a little bit of what the freshmen look like. Now I can do a podcasting transition too. Look at me. But I think that a lot of what Sion James's role ends up being is going to depend on, hey, is Con Knippel and Isaiah Evans, are they playing like top 10 recruits, or are they playing like top 25 recruits? And top 10 recruits are real darn hard to keep on the bench, as we know well. And I think that is going to, again, contribute to this huge potential variance, even on a game-to-game basis, I think, and how much of a role Sion James is going to have. And let me just conclude by saying, I love Sion James's game. I'm so excited to have him in a Duke uniform. You mentioned the sportsmanship award. He won Tulane, an award for Tulane that was the best overall student athlete at the entire university. That was, it took into account athletics, academics, and service. He's huge in the community. He's going to fit in the Duke uniform on day one, regardless of whether he's playing 5 minutes a game or 20 minutes a game. So I think, any conversation we have about him would be, lacking if we didn't take that into account. I think that's a big reason why he's in a Duke uniform and why that seemed to come together so quickly.
Okay, guys, Scott just teed it up for us, but we're going to take a quick commercial break. On the other side, the 3 freshmen. What are the roles we see for the 3 perimeter freshmen at Duke as this episode of the Duke Basketball Roundup continues after a quick break? Hey there, Duke fans. Warmer, sunnier days are calling. Fuel up for them with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for summer thanks to the menu of chef-created meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great-tasting meals.
That's right, Jason. And Jason, I can tell you, I just got some meals. They're fantastic. And the great thing is, like you said, 2 minutes, mindless work. Pop it in the microwave, do what you need to do, and it's ready to eat. No more cooking, no more cleaning pots and pans. And also, there's a lot of choices with 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week. So you'll always have new flavors to explore.
All right, so head to factormeals.com/DukeBB50. Use that code DukeBB50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code DukeBB50 at factormeals.com. Get 50% off your first box, 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Enjoy Factor Meals from the Duke Basketball Roundup.
The Dine Under menu is here for a limited time at Outback Steakhouse. Get an 18-ounce bone-in ribeye and our signature blend of 17 spices, Kingsland pasta, or juicy sirloin and lobster mac, starting at just $16.99. That's better than the actual Outback, where even if you caught dinner, you know deep down you couldn't do what needs to be done. Run free, little buddy. Run free. The Dine Under menu. It's better than the actual Outback. Starting at $16.99 for a limited time at Outback Steakhouse. Outback. No rules, just right.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
Want to be more active this summer? Sierra helps you save on everything from swimsuits to stand-up paddleboards, tennis rackets to fishing tackle. And if that doesn't float your boat, we also have pool floats. Sierra, let's get moving. To your local store, like now. Go!
All right, guys, we're back from the break. We're going to be on the clock here. We got to get moving. We have other things happening in our lives, and we got three freshmen we have to talk about. This is the big uncertainty. We really don't know what we're going to get. Scott teed it up for us a moment ago, but Isaiah Evans, Con Knippel, Darren Harris. I'm going to go ahead and start right now. And I've been the guy making sort of the bold predictions so far. I'm going to start with Con Knippel. That's the guy we're going to talk about first. And I'm going to tell you right now, he will outperform expectations. I'm higher on this guy, I am sure of it, than either one of you are. He is the product of a big basketball family, which means he has a superb basketball IQ. He is highly skilled. His handle is excellent. People don't realize how good this guy is at handling the basketball. I have a feeling he's been dribbling since he was in a crib. And he has great court vision. He is a legitimate playmaker. We were talking Donald earlier. Oh, what if Foster and Proctor are both off the floor? I'm sure every person listening to this podcast was like, they can't both be off the floor. Who would play point guard? I'm telling you right now, if you put that ball in Con Knippel's hands, he can play point guard for this Duke team. Now, he does not have elite athleticism, but he is very physical, especially for a freshman. He has a frame that will allow him to absorb contact and still make plays. We know that he can shoot. Need I remind you, in the EYBL season, the elite AAU season last year, playing against the best players in high school basketball, he hit 47% from three. 47%. That's a big number. Now, his D, his quickness, these are two things that could hold him back. But he's a smart player. And smart players know how to position themselves to make up for a lack of elite foot speed. And Duke is going to be full of incredible defensive help guys who can minimize the degree that K2 is taken advantage of defensively. I think he plays many more minutes than people expect. And I think he will be the top rotation guy among the perimeter freshmen.
You know, I will say this. I don't think you're, leap years higher on Con Knippel than everybody else. I am right there with you, especially considering how he can actually be versatile. He can, like I mentioned before, he can play a little bit bigger than his, he's 6'5". He's one of the short guys on the team. But he can play a little bit bigger as far as, guarding maybe a three or even, it maybe is a stretch for him to guard four, but at least a three. He can play that three and kind of be able to be efficient. I think when it comes to Con Knipple is where does he fit on defense? That's the real question for me. And I think when it comes to these three freshmen, you could tell me that one of them is going to start and play 30 minutes, and you could tell me all of them are going to play like 2 minutes, and I wouldn't be able to disagree with you on any of that right now. But having said that, the way Con Knipple plays, yes, his three is going to be a determining factor to keep him on the game. But Jason, just like Jaden Shoot, right? Jaden Shoot, you were super high on his three, but what kept him off the floor? His defense. TJ Power, we were really high on his three. What kept him off the floor? His defense. The question for Con Knipple is, can he defend? Where does he fit on defense? And if he can defend and keep guys in front of him, then his three is going to keep him in the ball game. His defense is going to keep him in the ball game. But if one is lacking, it's going to be very easy to take him off court, just like we mentioned for Caleb Foster, right? If there's no leap in ability, if there's no show that, hey, you deserve these 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever you're getting, there's guys who are waiting in the wings to take their turn and get the minutes and steal them from him. So that's the real question I have for Con Knipple. Where does he fit on defense, and can he succeed in that? Because that is how freshmen get on the floor, and that's how freshmen stay on the floor.
So I think part of the reason I was so emphasizing the variance on Sion James is because I'm also high on Con Knipple. I'm apparently not going to be going out on many limbs in this edition of the podcast today. I think that we could very easily see a situation where the start of the year, Sion James is playing 15 minutes and Con Knipple's playing 5, but come March, that's inverted. I think that as he develops, that shooting is, again, the thing that this team needs most around a transcendent talent in Cooper Flagg. And I also think that some of the defensive things that you're mentioning, Donald, I see that as more of a concern if Con Knipple is playing the 3 than if he's playing the 2. I think if he's playing the 2 at 6'5", 6'6", with he's not a wimpy 6'5", 6'6" either. I think he will be able to make up for the lack of foot speed with his physicality against the 2 guard more than he would against the 3. And I also think that in that situation, he's much more likely to get bailed out by Cooper Flagg or Common Malik coming up to clean up his mess. The other thing that the more I look at Con Knipple,
or Malik Brown or Mason Gillis, I mean, like, there are great help.
Exactly.
This team is full of help defenders. That's why, really quick, I'll let you finish. But, Donald, in answer to your question, the point you make about how wrong I have been for 2 years in a row about Jaden Shoot, the reason I think Con Knipple is a different kind of story is that this is a Duke team where the help defense can allow a guy who maybe isn't a plus defender to still get time. All right, Scott, continue. Sorry.
The last thing on Con Knipple. There was a freshman last year who profiled very similar to Con Knipple.
Oh, you're going to go Reed Shepherd. You're going to go Reed Shepherd, aren't you?
I can't swear yet on this podcast. I don't have enough good, vibes built up, but that was exactly where I was going. Yes, there are obvious aesthetic similarities between him and Reed Shepherd, but there are some game similarities too. They're both,
hey, they're family similarities as well. Both come from basketball playing families. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Reed Shepherd was a guy who no one saw coming and now could be the number 3 pick in the draft, which I think says more about how bad this draft is than anything else. But regardless, there is more than a passing similarity between Con Knipple's game and how scouts talk about Con Knipple and how scouts were talking about Reed Shepherd entering this year. If Duke finds a Reed Shepherd clone, or I think a Reed Shepherd with a higher ceiling given his size, then we are just going to have the greatest year in our lives. And that is not the expectation, but I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility.
Man, Scott, I will freely admit I was not going to go there on Reed Shepherd until you said there's another freshman. I was like, and I knew the second you said it, I knew where you were going. I apologize for stealing your thunder there, my friend. But that is
you are entitled. I'm only a very special guest. You are entitled to steal my thunder.
Gentlemen, let's move on then to Isaiah Evans. We are all so high on Reed. On sorry, on Reed Shepherd. We're so high on Con Knipple. Could we also be as high on Isaiah Evans? Donald, I'll let you go first. What do you see from this man?
I'm higher on Isaiah Evans. I say that because I've been able to watch him play quite a bit. This man is a walking bucket. I like in high school, especially this last year and a half. If there is a guy, there was points where arguably amongst the the entering Duke freshmen, there was nobody playing better than Isaiah Evans at times. And yes, Cooper Flagg is one of those guys that is coming in with this class. I think when it comes to Isaiah Evans, he can play multiple positions. 1, 2. He can even go out in the wing. He's a scorer. He's not necessarily a guy who shoots the ball super well or a guy who drives the ball super well, but he can do everything very, very good. And I think one of the things, and also he's athletic, he can defend a little bit. And what I like most about him is that this man is a dog. He can, dish out the trash talk, but he also can back it up. He has been doing it with UNC fans his entire life. And he has, this past year, he's been chirping with fans and players that go to UNC or are about to go to UNC. But every single time he lines up against them, he's winning. This man is a 2-time Mr. Basketball in North Carolina. That's no slouch. This kid has some, and when we talked about him being Baby Ingram, he has that prototypical type of game that Brandon Ingram has. And if we remember how good Brandon Ingram was as a freshman, if he brings even a little bit to Durham, he can walk into a starting role and put up 10, 15 a night, and nobody would blink because he could still be the fourth option when he's on the floor when that happens. That's a lot of pressure for this Duke team, but for Isaiah Evans, it feels like he embraces all that pressure and it kind of just bounces off of him. And he just kind of takes it and throws it into the rim and it goes in his 3 points. Everyone goes crazy. I expect to see, it's weird. I think I expect to see initially him be kind of a guy that comes off the bench, 6th, 7th man, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him start some games because he has that pedigree as a freshman coming in. That talent is there.
So here's where I am in Isaiah Evans. I just think he's so streaky. I mean, look, we saw it in the All-Star games where a couple of the All-Star games, the McDonald's game and one of the other ones, was it the Nike Hoop Classic? I forget.
Yes.
He was like almost non-existent. Didn't hit a lot of shots, didn't do a lot of other things. And then he had one, then at the Iverson game, he was like the MVP of the game. We didn't really talk about that much in this podcast, but so streaky that I think you will see Shire sort of give him some run every game. And if he's having one of those days where he's got it, you let my man cook. You let him cook, and he's going to put up 15 points or so in a limited role. But there are going to be games where he doesn't have it, and suddenly his second half minutes are going to go to 0, and we're going to have to wait for a better day from Isaiah. I also think confidence could be a big, big factor for him because I really worry my man going to get destroyed, massacred in practice over this summer playing against Sion James and Mason Gillis, because those guys are going to be matched up with each other a pretty fair amount of the time. And poor Isaiah Evans, the physicality he is going to face in these Duke practices and the physicality he will face when Duke is playing games is a huge, huge step up from what Baby Ingram is used to at the high school level. This guy is too thin, I think, to be able to handle the amount of physicality you get in the college game now. The college game is older than it's ever been. And I think he's not quite as long and lanky as Brandon Ingram was. And I think it's just going to be a struggle for him to really assert himself against guys in a year. Hopefully he sticks around. In a year, I could see him being like maybe leading scorer on the team.
To be fair, we don't start the cookout diet for freshmen until they actually get to campus. So he has all summer to do that. But yes, 170 pounds is what he's listed at in high school. That
dripping wet.
Yeah, that used to be like in the low of the middle range, right? That'd be like the 25 to 75%. That was a 25%. Now that's like the 5%. You want guys above 200 pounds. But I think the good thing is it seems like he has the frame to put on a little bit more weight and be able to bang with the big bodies and absorb some of that punishment. And this summer is going to be great because he has two older brothers, so to speak, that are gonna, that can pummel him in practice to prepare him for the season.
Yeah, look, my bottom line is I think only one of Evans or Knipple is going to play a big role in the rotation. Scott, you talked about not being burned. One of these guys, I think it's going to be like number 7 or 8, and probably number 8, and one of them is going to be like number 9 or 10. And I just think it's Knipple, not Evans. Scott, give me your take really quick.
The thing about Isaiah Evans that gives me some pause about his role is, you guys, when we talked about the transfers, we talked about fit, and how important that is. Isaiah Evans, to me, profiles as a guy who needs the ball in his hands a lot, who is a high volume shooter and scorer, who is a creator off the dribble. I'm not sure if that's what this Duke team needs, at least on the first unit. Again, I've said this over and over again. So much of this roster construction seems to be putting the right guys around Cooper Flagg. Isaiah Evans profiles as a shooter, in that sense complements Cooper Flagg, but he also seems to be the type of guy who wants and needs the ball in his hands to have that dog in him to make that offensive effort. I think we could see a situation where Isaiah Evans, pause for Detroit reference here, Isaiah Evans is a little bit like the microwave. Isaiah Evans is a little bit of a Vinnie Johnson, where he's the type of guy who's a walking bucket. If offense goes cold, we put him in for a 5-minute stretch where his job is to go score. You put Isaiah Evans out there with a quote unquote second unit. And yes, that's not as much of a thing in the college game as it is in the NBA, but you put him out on a second unit, maybe when Cooper Flagg is getting a rest, and then he can have the ball in his hands. He can go against maybe a, not top tier defender. He could have some games where he scores 10, 20 points off the bench. That's the role I see for him. The other thing that's worth noting here is, more than raw ranking, when you look at the 247 and the rivals rankings and all those things, one of the things that seems to be more indicative is the trend in rankings. And Isaiah Evans, for whatever reason, has slid down the rankings over the last calendar year. And again, I need to take the time to do this type of analysis, but those are the type of guys that more often than not profile as they need some more time to develop. And it's the guys that are the late risers who often come in and surprise. So again, I think that there's a role to be had for Isaiah Evans, but I think it's an off the bench offensive specialist role. I don't think it's necessarily the starters minutes that we might have pegged him for when he committed last year.
Yeah, I'm with you. Isaiah Evans is a guy I think who needs to be able to miss 2 or 3 so he can hit his next 5 or 6. I'm just not sure that John Shire has the patience to watch him miss 2 or 3, but we'll see. Look, guys, 3 minutes. I need 1 minute from each one of you on Darren Harris. Scott, go first.
The fact that Darren Harris is on this team means something. The fact that after all of the rumors from the Trilly Donovans and whatnot about someone was going to be decommitting from this class and people thought it was going to be Darren Harris and that didn't happen, I think that says something. Maybe this is wishful thinking, especially given what we saw this past season with the transfers out. But the fact that there isn't a clear pathway to playing time for Darren Harris in his freshman year, but he's still on this team when he very easily could have asked for an NLI release and gone somewhere where he was going to start right away, which we've seen happen a lot, by the way. That's becoming really, really common, as these late in the year release of letter of intent. The fact that that didn't happen says something to me. It says either this guy is so darn confident that he thinks he's going to come in and he's going to make his mark, which, heck yeah, if that's going to happen, that means that he's just skyrocketed, or that means he recognizes that maybe this isn't his year and next year is going to be when he comes into play. I don't know which one of those two it is, but I have a feeling that if it wasn't one of those two situations, he might be out somewhere else other than Durham, North Carolina this fall.
I think when it comes to Darren Harris, I think you're right. It feels like he's the one who has to make up the most ground to see playing time on the floor. But I also think that's part of his MO. That's part of his style. Remember, he plays down the street at PVI. He did not start all 4 years. He waited his turn because this, PVI is the second best team in the country, right? They got all the way to the national title game to face Cooper Flag. He
was waiting his turn behind Trevor Keels. I mean, come on.
Right. Yeah. He's been on this team and he has had to, wait his turn to craft out his role. And this year, I think he accelerated largely, in fact, because people, at least outside of, Duke recruiting circles, started to see him for the first time and they go, oh, this kid's incredible. This guy can fill it up from three, can get really hot. I think his question is going to be, what else can he do to make it where he kind of leapfrogs past some of the other freshmen to get those playing minutes? And I don't know where that is, but that's also what the summer is for. If there's a guy who can make the most of this summer, it's Darren Harris, because he can be a guy who's going to be, as Jason would put, number 11 or 12, right? He could be that guy. But if he has a really good summer, how many guys in the last couple of years, we've had some, Jared McCain was not pegged to start. He was play some minutes, but he wasn't pegged to start. He had a great summer. He started every single game. Kyle Filipowski was not expected to be a major contributor. He ended up being the contributor for 2 years. So I'm not saying that Darren Harris is on that trajectory to come out of the woodwork and score 20 points a game, but he can be a guy that once he sees the floor, he's going to make the most of those opportunities, because he probably in his mind knows they aren't going to be prevalent minutes. There are going to be times when he's on the floor, make something happen. That's where he can get hot from three, hit a couple threes, and really show some other part of his game that'll keep him on the floor.
So my take on Darren Harris is this. First of all, Scott, I think you're absolutely right. The guys who accelerate in the rankings, guys who rise up there, are guys who often are really, really worth looking at. And Darren Harris is one of those guys. This is a dude who was in the 50s or 60s. And now at the end of his high school career, after leading PBI in scoring, PBI being the second best high school team in the country, Darren Harris is generally ranked in the 30s or so, and some folks have him in the 20s. So he's a guy who's gone up in rankings. That said, he was a spot-up shooter at PBI. He was not a guy who created a lot off the dribble. I also think at the high school level, he had a real size advantage in games. He was 6'6". But that size advantage is going to be muted a good bit at the college level. He's going to mostly play. He's not going to play the two. I think he's mostly going to play the three at Duke, because he doesn't have the handle. He doesn't have the ball, distribution kind of skills to play the two really. And if he's playing the three, he's going to be playing guys who are 6'5", 6'6". So he's not going to have that size advantage that he had at the high school level. And look, he's shown he can score with anybody, but I just keep coming back to the fact that he's not a great defender. He doesn't have good slashing ability. He's not someone putting the ball on the floor. And it's going to be him against K2 and Evans for those freshman minutes on the perimeter. And I think only one of them is going to really consistently get minutes in the rotation. And I think Harris is behind the other two guys. We discussed it at length. And so, I think we're looking at the guy who's probably number 10 or number 11 in the rotation for Duke. And history tells us we're talking mop-up minutes if you're 10 or 11 out there. All right, guys, with that, I'm calling it. We're wrapping it up. We've been on for a long time. Folks, check your feed. In the next few days, we will have the same version of this, but with the big men. Maybe it won't be quite as long because there are not as many big men. But on the other hand, when we start talking about Cooper Flag and Common Malawach, watch out. There's going to be a long conversation going on there.
I'll just predict my best prediction is we're going to talk about Cooper Flag and Common Malawach, and then we'll have to take a break because we have gone 40 minutes.
There you go. Exactly. Good call. For Scott Rich, for Donald Wine, I am Jason Evans. This has been the latest episode of the Duke Basketball Roundup, and this is the Duke Band. Listen to them now. They're playing us out and taking us home.